Welcome to another episode of Kings and Queens of Miniature Castles. Today with me we have Professor Stacey Bosley. Hi,
Hi, good to see you.
it's good to see you too. Uh, sounds so wooden. It's all right. Um, we'll edit that out. Today we're today we're in your office because you are a professor here at Hamline University in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
St. Paul,
St. Paul. Okay, that's
actually.
awkward. In St. Paul, Minnesota, in the great state country of the United States of America. What is it that you do here? You're a professor. We
hmm
got that in the air. Oh,
Professor of economics. Yep.
okay.
hmm
And then for those of us who don't know, economics is the study of.
Yeah. I mean, it's a social science in that it studies human behavior, but it really studies human behavior in the context of scarcity, how people make decisions with scarce resources, right? How that then um, sort of builds up to market level outcomes, right? So, like, what if you're a microeconomist like me, you study like how people are making choices in their individual like labor decisions, jobs, right? Or in the grocery store or, with their money. But then macroeconomists study how all of that activity sort of builds up to inflation or prices or unemployment or, right? These like larger scale things.
Okay.
So we tend to kind of divide ourselves into the micro and macro realm, and I'm more of a micro person.
Okay. And I feel like when I think about that, I think psychology, the study of the brain, sociology, or the study of the individual mind,
hmm
sociology, the study of the human community mind,
hmm
and then economics then is kind of like their actions and specifically putting a financial money equivalence to their actions and to their mindsets.
Yeah, it's true that a lot of the decisions that we think about, right, are in a financial context, right? So investing or savings or, right, the way that we, again, choose to save our labor earnings. But we do also love to say we can study everything.
Yeah,
So we also look at,
absolutely.
like marriage and family, like literally like people's choices around having children or environmental decisions. So it doesn't always have to have a dollar amount associated
Okay.
with it.
Okay, so it can be very nuanced and very niche in what field
Yeah,
you would
we like
study
to
in.
think about it as like if it's an environment of scarcity in which you have to make decisions, right? Then economics applies.
Okay. Okay, that's awesome. Before we delve too much further into this, let's just talk about how did you end in this field? What kind of like brought you to this field and how you set yourself up for this place?
Yeah, so I didn't have any, economics in high school, anything like that. Went to a small school in a rural area. But when I got to college, I really liked my economics classes, but I also didn't understand what it meant to pursue a social science. And that actually kind of scared me away. Like, I wanted financial security. So I wanted to, um, to do something I knew there was a direct translation to a job. So I studied finance. That made sense to me. Like, there are banks and there are people who do financial lending, right? And
Hmm.
or advising. Um, but along the way, I also had some professors who were like kind of life changing, and actually a professor who was a professor of British literature who was like showed me that you could have a passion for an intellectual subject. Like, I knew you could, yeah, I mean, I thought about passion in terms of family and, right? Maybe like music or, hobbies,
Yeah.
but I didn't think about passion intellectually. And so I ended up taking every class this person taught, even though like that I could get my hands on, even though like I wasn't an English major. And ultimately, after I left college and I reflected on what had the most meaning to me, I thought I would love to be that person for somebody else,
Mm.
but I can't be him. He looked like Stephen King and drank 20 cups of coffee a day. And he taught British literature. Like, that's not me. But if I could figure out what I'm passionate about intellectually and like do the same kind of thing for students, that's what motivated me. And then when I reflected on what I actually was intellectually most drawn to, it was economics. And so then I started, after a couple of years of working as a consultant and computer programmer, I went back to graduate school, which is a long process in its own right.
Yeah. Where did you go to undergrad?
Yeah, so I started at Oshkosh, UW Oshkosh, and
Oshkosh, the gosh.
yeah, and that's where I had this professor, Professor Paul Klemp, to give him a shout out. But then I actually transferred to Madison, and finished my degree there. I kind of had the bigger is better mindset.
Mm,
Um, and then I ultimately went to graduate school at University of Minnesota.
okay. Okay. Nice. And then it was in graduate school then that you went specifically for economics.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, for a PhD.
Okay.
Mhm.
What does it look like to gain a PhD in like one of the more like not philosophical but like knowledge based?
Yeah. Well, I got really lucky because I had no idea what I was in for. Like, I really didn't know.
Mm,
Um, no one in my family had pursued a PhD. No one had studied economics. And it's actually a very mathematical discipline. And I happen to like math, but I wasn't, I didn't fully understand the mathematical nature of the discipline I was embarking on. So it took a lot of sort of resourcefulness to like fill in the gaps that I had, but I liked it a lot. So I just think that now I try to, encourage students to study the area they're going into a little more, but because I feel like I lucked out. Like I liked it. I didn't know though what I was doing. So, and it took about 5.5 years to go through like a little initial master's coursework and then all the way through the PhD. So it's a big commitment.
mm. Were you working and like having a family at this time then too, or was it specifically I'm going after my PhD?
Yeah, so most PhD programs are full-time day programs, especially ones where you get funding. So it was a very low income, but it was the tuition paid for by the government kind of thing, like the USDA actually. And so it was my day job. And at that time, I got married, but I didn't have kids yet. Only right at the end did I have my first child. And luckily, I kind of was able to finish pretty quickly after he was born because it's very hard to be a caregiver and finish a program of that nature.
Okay. Okay. And then once then you graduated, did you pursue a teaching job right away or was
Yeah, part-time because already had my first child. I decided to be a part-time instructor. That is not a secure position by
mm,
any means. It's low pay. It's term to term, you're finding like what courses do people need
mm,
filled. But it was just the balance I decided I wanted to strike. I don't think I fully understood how risky it was in terms of like if I ever wanted to get into full time. Like people don't usually do what I did, which is like be part time for quite a while. Um, so, but I liked it. I liked the balance of like teaching some and being a caregiver, sort of half half.
okay, nice. And like I know for myself, I really enjoyed my economics classes. I took micro and macro economics at a technical college. And I love my professor. He was this old gruff bouncer. He worked as a bouncer.
Wow.
He was like head of like the motorcycle like Harley club in the area.
I
Did security for like the city's events and just
feel
had
like
a
that
nice
is
white
not the
ponytail.
standard economics
Right?
professor.
And he just come in and he just start drawing stuff on a whiteboard.
Mhm.
He's a little artistic, and then just teaching economics. And I was like, all right, I
Wow.
don't I know what's gonna happen
I
today,
can't
but
believe you're not an economist now. Like,
right?
that sounds perfect.
I can still see him. Like, I think I went to his house one time to like rake leaves or something like that. But just a very like, I could listen to him chat about anything because he always had amazing stories to tell. Um, but it's always a great time when your professor is able to relate to you and give the subject matter in such a way that you're able to kind of respond to it and you're
Mhm.
able to internalize it more than just this is just for school, this is just for a grade, but like actually really learn. And I think that's one of the things that I want to kind of push in this podcast too is like even if you go to college to learn. Don't go to college just for the degree, just for the what you're going to get out of it for your job, but go to learn because never again are you going to have that ability to sit and like be taught by people who are passionate about their thing.
And
And
I was the
and
worst with that. I was what we call a strategic learner in undergrad, where I was like, I need the A and then I'm going to move on. And it was one of the things that this professor that I mentioned that was inspiring to me, like really pushed me on because he was just like, oh no, like it's about a lot more than that. And I really appreciated that.
well, um, speaking about that, then now you're a full-time professor here at Hamlin. What is it that you desire out of your students, and what is it that you desire out of yourself for both like what you bring to the table to teach and how you're hoping for them to respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you captured it nicely in terms of like putting it in a context that people can care about, right? Like it's one of the things that drew me to economics is that it is pretty versatile. Like again, we can think about kind of appeal to the different things that we each naturally care about. And then also, of course, motivate care about other things that maybe haven't been in our field of vision, right? So whether that's you have a natural inclination to care about environmental issues or healthcare or
Mm.
labor issues, whatever it is, right? Like we can build a skill set that allows you to like explore whatever it is that you care most about, because really that's what you're doing. You're building like a set of tools for inquiry. You're not It doesn't matter if you remember some very specific term or some one particular model. The question is like, can you build the capacity to study things that are interesting? Um, and that's why a lot of econ majors end up like going into a lot of different fields because it's a pretty different or pretty versatile, toolkit.
Yeah, yeah, and I just liked just the ability that it gave me to like understand statistics honestly just a lot
Yeah.
better and how statistics can be used to say both sides of the equation. You know, like they'll say pictures, um, you can lie with a picture. I don't know the actual, I can't remember the actual phrase,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like same thing with statistics. And like we're in such a world where stats is used for anything and everything, and you're like, even when I take like a personality test or anything like that, I'm like, man, this question like really put me in a box and doesn't like allow me to do anything. But um, I know it just starts getting me thinking then about like, all right, how do I actually, um, is the information that I'm giving actually relevant, or is it actually true, or is how's it getting skewed?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I mean, like you set up, in that case, they set up a way in which they get data from you. And is that data like good, valid? Is there measurement error in it? Did you even understand what they were asking? Like, right? Like
yeah,
the evidence is only as good as the data and the sort of the questions that were underlying it, right? So, like one of the things that I do for research is we create a lot of economic experiments and to try to like tease out reasons that people might make different decisions and form judgments and things like that. But so we have to be really careful that what we're creating has some validity, right? Or like it's just junk.
yeah.
Or can be used, right, in to generate a result that you wanted from the start. So, right, that's a big part of it is being objective, building something that has like validity and isn't driven by what you want to find.
And how do you teach that to your students?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I love about being a small school is that I mean, I came from really large schools myself, and now here, right, I have smaller classes where we can do like, we don't just read about it, we do it. So,
Like, what is your class?
yeah, so like, I mean, I teach a number of different classes, but one of them, for example, is behavioral and experimental economics. So that's a lot about like kind of the cognitive biases that might cause us to deviate from what we would think a rational person would do. So,
Hmm.
like, we're not saving the way that we say we want to, right? We might not act in line with our own personal goals related to exercise or health or like a whole bunch of things, right? So, how do we build experiments that help us tease out some of the ways in which our can't like open up our brain and like like so we have to try to build situations where we can try to learn something about the dynamics of decision making.
Hmm.
So when I teach that class, like we design an experiment from beginning to end and implement it and analyze the results. We've done experiments on like dating related topics, on environmental behaviors, on my area, which is consumer financial fraud. And, we walk through the whole process of like design of of a valid experiment and then all the way through to what does it reveal about
Okay.
people.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, all those classes sound like it'd be really fun to just kind of like be a fly on the wall and just kind of learn a little bit.
Well, you should come be a fly on the wall then.
All right. Well, you heard it from good to know. Good to know. And how did you get to this campus specifically? What drew you to it, and like, yeah, what drew you to it?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for a small liberal arts school where you could really build relationships with students and where teaching was the priority. So I've actually over time come to really love research. But when I started, I was motivated, as I said, by a really influential educator in my life. So I was really focused on teaching. And small liberal arts schools are a perfect place for that, right? Where teaching is valued above, almost everything else you could do.
Versus at a larger school, then it's teaching or research. Then would
Right.
be
A
the
lot of
alternative.
appointments at a large school might be, say, two-thirds research and, one-third teaching or something
Hmm.
like that, where ours is flipped.
Okay. Okay. So that's definitely pro. If you want to be taught by people who are passionate, small school
I
is
mean, it's one way to go.
it's one way to go. Okay. Maybe not the best way. It just depends on what you want. Okay. And then as a professor, has there how have you seen like students like as they come in, what's kind of like that peak time for them to be able to I don't even know what I'm asking right now. We're gonna to yeah. What's the peak flirting time of the day? I don't know what I was gonna ask. Um, but okay, as a professor, you see the students come and go. What makes for a great student and what makes for a poor student?
I mean, I think one of the things that can make learning difficult is just a fear of engagement. I mean, I think especially at a small school, like we expect to know you. And so there's if you wish you were sitting in the back of the room and sort of never had to engage, or wanted to learn primarily through your book or like, I mean, like we are a place of that kind of interpersonal engagement. So I feel like, there's lots of reasons why students might struggle with that, right? Maybe it's lack of confidence or lack of experience in a college environment. We have actually very proud of having a lot of first generation college students. About half of Hamlin students are have a no parent, their parents didn't go to college. And so, one of the things we know is then we have to just make this the most welcoming environment where we also don't have a lot of hidden rules, like some people call it the hidden curriculum. Like if you've grown up with higher ed in your family and it's like you just kind of know how to navigate things, or your parents help you navigate things, all right? Like it's just part of what you're able to do without a lot of support sometimes, not always. But, we want to make sure that this is a place that anybody can succeed. But we do want you to engage with us. And so I think there's other things that can get away. Mental health is obviously a really large issue. And so, we talk a lot about how to support students through those struggles, which can hit at different times, right, in people's journeys. So I think for me, engagement is the number one thing, right? Like if you're willing to be in this space with me and like engage with me, I feel like success will come.
Mm. And a couple questions off of that. The first one being, you're saying like around 50% of your students being like first generation college students. Do you know if that's like um, people whose like families like are like first generation to the US or like international students or like kind of what the demographics are
Yeah.
for, or if they're like
I don't know the breakdown. I mean,
okay.
certainly some of our students who are first generation are also, their parents might have immigrated or they themselves came as refugees, or immigrated. But we have a lot of students also who maybe don't fit that situation, but just didn't come from a family where college education was in their history.
Mhm. And do you think that's kind of these results are from effort on like the college board side of like who they're trying to bring in, or is it just kind of naturally happening and like word of mouth kind of?
Yeah. I think it's both. I think we see ourselves as a good environment for students, like who might struggle to navigate a school of 50,000, like the University of Minnesota, right? Like, but I also think there's word of mouth within communities, right? Like if it feels like, this has worked for their kids or their relatives, then, we do get certainly that kind of word of mouth effect as well.
Yeah, no, that's sweet. And the second question was, you were talking about like mental health and kind of like stepping into that with the students' lives,
Mm.
and are how are you kind of words are hard sometimes. Was there education that you received
Mm.
to learn how to kind of step into it, or like because I feel like it's just become such like a important thing in like various areas now where people need to have some kind of knowledge of mental health and how to step into others' lives with it, and like it's just a question of how well they were educated on that. And like,
Oh, yeah.
like I'll go to the doctor's office and one of the new questions for like a physical is, you have to do your mental health check, and it's just a quick two questions. How are you feeling? Have you been depressed recently in the last bit? And then
Hmm.
that's that.
Hmm.
Um, which, I feel like is very much the definition of just a checklist kind of dealio. But have you gotten education from your supervisors, or how is it that you've been helped with this?
It's funny that just today, this morning, right, we had a session on mental health, we had a session on neurodiversity, right? So, like, our university does try to prepare us. But I would say that one of the ways they prepare us is also to know our limits.
Mm.
I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist, right? So I have to know where my boundaries are and I have to know enough to try to get them connected to the resources that they may need. So part of it is like just building relationships so that people trust you to share things that they might be experiencing, but only to the degree that you can actually help. Like I'm not going to overstep those my professional bounds. um but we want students to tell us when they need resources they don't have.
Okay. Okay, so ultimately, just looking at the overall health of the student that is kind of within your professor title.
Right.
Is
And
it?
we're advisors as well. So like we meet with students once a semester that we're just advising on a more holistic basis. So, and then just within our classes as well, right? If someone has started to be absent or, seems to be facing challenges, right? How do we help sort of see some warning signs potentially and get them connected with support?
Okay. Okay. And then we're gonna take a quick shift over a little bit. We've talked about your professor side of your profession, but then you also have a side business, so to speak, where you counsel, not counsel, but
Consult.
consult. Yes,
Yes.
that was the word. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So, just to kind of give some context for how I came to that work, it really relates to the other piece of my job as a professor, which is scholarship. So, one of the things that I think is unique about being a professor, some of the teaching related things I talked about might be similar to what a high school teacher might do, right? At least there's some parallels for sure. But one thing that's unique about a professor role is the expectation of building new scholarly knowledge. And one thing that's really cool about it is that you get to pick where that is, right? Like, so that, you might have to find your way to the things that both have the most meaning to you, but also that you think you have the most capacity to build new knowledge in. So for me, I started scholarship in the area of like labor and people's choices in the job markets and things like that, like how much they move early in their career and whether that has positive or negative consequences and things like that. And it was interesting to me, but I wouldn't say that I felt like there was going to be any power in that work. Like, it wasn't clear how it was going to help people.
Mm.
So I wasn't, frankly, super motivated by it. I thought it would like end up in a journal and no one would read it, and that would be that. Um, but when I took some time away from scholarship when I was doing part-time teaching, it gave me time to think a little bit more about like what I really could see investing myself in that I thought would have more impact. And that's when I decided to start studying pyramid schemes and the related industry of multi-level marketing. And that was just through, like we all have different life experiences and just seeing things that were like unique or interesting that other people weren't paying attention to. And it just so happened that that work then led to engagement on legal cases because there there are instances where there's potentially illegal activity happening and they need an expert to step in and sort of help analyze the situation. Like, is in fact some conduct illegal or not? And my research just happened to kind of segue into that kind of work in the legal space.
Okay. And then so now you're an expert witness within the concept of pyramid schemes, multi marketing schemes. Is that at the state level, or what level then is that?
Yeah, usually it's at the federal level. So I've worked with like the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which are both federal in nature, nationwide class action
Mm.
lawsuits, but also state level attorney general's office.
Okay.
So it can be either.
Okay. And what does that look like for you to consult into those situations? Um, because we were talking about this a little earlier, but it sounds like you have to make a case for this entire thing. So is this a like months long process, years long process, or how do you develop a case to either confirm or deny
Yeah.
that?
So the way it starts is that it gets initiated by the state or federal regulator or the litigators, and then they bring me in, and I am responsible for looking at the evidence and coming to my own determination. So, while I am hired by, right, the um, federal or state government, regulatory body or the law firm, I'm an independent expert. So again, they provide me with information that I ask for. So I have to determine what evidence do I need to come to a determination. And then they provide that to me, and then I analyze it, and then I give them my judgment effectively. And then, often then testify about that in the courtroom, for example.
Gotcha. How did you get into that? I feel like that's a very specific,
Yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
area.
I
How did
mean,
you get
it's
to
the
that?
definition of niche,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I just started researching it, and then I like to tell this story to students because I feel like it's one of those, like, you never know where something's going to go. Um, I was trying to figure out how to study pyramid schemes, is what I started with. And we saw an article in the newspaper about a case that the state of Montana had done against a company
Mm.
that they accused of being a pyramid scheme. And so it was in the USA Today. And I was like, well, let's call the state of Montana. And because it's actually hard to get data, it's hard to get anything tangible to study this industry, this area. So they just happened, actually sent a very charming student to call the state of Montana.
Nice.
And they said yes to him. And so, like, we got data from that. And it was data on all the victims of this scheme in the state of Montana.
Hmm.
And that honestly, like, writing an academic paper on that, then trying to figure out in that case, for example, like, why was there more um more victims in some places than others? Like, what made certain places more vulnerable than others? And that, getting a published article on that, then, put me on the map of people who wanted experts in this area. And there just aren't hardly
Yeah.
any. And so, again, I couldn't have planned that exactly, right? I just followed a path that I thought was super interesting and also understudied. And then it just happened to align with a need, right, in the legal space.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we've said the phrase a couple of times now, but how would you define a pyramid slash multi-marketing company?
Yeah. So first, if we think about, and I'll try not to take 2 hours to answer this question. Um, Pyramid schemes are, these chain referral structures. So in the old days, there would literally be like a physical letter, for example, and you would like receive this letter in the mail, and it would be like, you know, send money to this address and send this letter on to 6 other people, and then ask them to do the same thing, right? And if enough people do that, you'll then get paid, right? So there are modern day incarnations of that. I mean, chain letters still exist, like in their physical form, but mostly it's other things now, right? And there are things like what are called blessing looms. So they're like these things that might show up in your like social media feed, and they're the same basic structure. It's like pay $1,400 to get in, you pay it to the person in the center, then you recruit a couple of other people. Once you recruit enough people, you'll be the person in the center and you get paid.
Mm.
Okay. Now, I'm starting with that because those are just like bold face pyramid schemes, right? And they're illegal because they're inherently deceptive. And they're inherently deceptive because most people by design will lose money in that structure, right? So for all of you out there who ever see one that has wine or presents or books, I always, there's like a book one where it's like, send a book to the person in the center, then go, get 6 more people to send books, and you will get 36 books.
Mm.
And my story is like, unless books have babies, like that doesn't work. Okay. Because you sent one book, there is no way the math works that you won't even get one book, but at most, right, the math says you should get one book, not 36.
Yeah.
So they're just inherently deceptive. By design, some people will gain, most people will lose. Okay. Now, Sometimes pyramid schemes also show up as a multi-level marketing company. And a multi-level marketing company is a situation where you might pay to get a starter pack of products. One case I was on, that would have been a case of energy drinks. And then, so you pay $500 for your starter pack, and then you're supposed to go recruit some other people who will also buy energy drinks. And then so on and so forth, right? Well, if the main essence of that enterprise is the same as the blessing loom, pay and recruit more people who will pay, that can be a pyramid scheme, right? But that's a hard line for consumers to know. Like if it's presented as a multi-level marketing scheme, then I can make money on selling the energy drink potentially and by recruiting other people who will pay in. Well, do I know if that is legal or illegal? That's a very nuanced question, and that's actually why you need an expert.
Yeah.
And that's tricky from a consumer perspective, right? Because like it doesn't help them that like you need an expert. Be nice if they could tell.
Yeah.
Um, but unfortunately, it can be hard. So I try to tell people like if the essence of the structure is pay and recruit other people who will pay, and that is the primary way that you make money, then you should run away.
Mm.
But if the primary thing is like you sell a lot of products, energy drinks, let's say, to a lot of people who just love energy drinks, well, then that's more like a retail enterprise, right? And then it might be fine. You still might have to worry about whether you're going to make any money at it or not.
Yeah.
But, at least then it's primarily about just selling product to people who might want product.
Getting a commission versus trying to get other people
Exactly.
to that.
Exactly.
Okay. Are there some examples that you'd feel comfortable with sharing as far as like kind of blatant political, not political, multi-marketing companies versus some that are more like nuanced?
I mean, there's ones that I've already been engaged in, and I've come to determinations that they were operating as pyramid schemes, and those were companies like um, Vimo, which was the one I was describing that had energy drinks that was like big on college campuses, things like that. I've also been in other cases like Advocare, which was a supplements company. There's a number of cases, but it's a tough thing because like unless you've really dug in and like really studied the company, you hate to speak one way or another about whether it's like legit or not. What I would say is like, again, as a potential participant, you just want to know this is a potential risk, right? If you are paid in part for recruitment, it's possible that that enterprise is operating as a pyramid scheme and you should be mindful of that. Like, and also a very common problem is that they also misrepresent what you can earn. And so you'll want to take any representations of potential earnings with a giant grain of salt. Like get your own information or be very careful about your expectations. That's another thing that we do a lot of research on is like people's expectations and how to fully inform them about what kind of risks they might be taking on.
Okay. Um, so would you say like any job that you have where you kind of like host like a party or whatever to try to get your friends um to invest in it would lean towards the side?
It's it's a question you'd have to ask yourself, right? If that's a big part of the way in which it works is like, my earnings will be dependent on the number of other participants I can get in, right? Then you have to ask yourself, well, that comes with some risk. Like that could be functioning as a pyramid. And I have to be, really cautious when recruitment is a big part of the puzzle.
Okay. Yeah, I just feel like yeah, there's just so many examples that kind of like pop up to mind of various friends or family or friends of friends that get started in this and either uh, like either ask me about it or ask other friends and family about it, and it's always just like, how do I tell, how can I tell if this is legitimate or not?
Yeah.
Um, and then, if it's not, then how do I help them see that it's not
Yeah.
legitimate,
Yeah.
without like,
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So on the first side, like how do you just discern for yourself,
mhm,
right? There's again a couple of things I would think about. One is like just literally trying to get concrete data on who's made any money in this and what's the typical outcome, right? Do and sometimes if they start to seem like they're deceiving you about that part, I mean that's a warning sign right there, right? Like they should be able to tell you what the typical person makes. And then they should also be able to tell you, like, to what degree am I earning money based on recruitment versus sales of this product or service to like, legitimate customers. And if they don't know the answer to that question or they're not comfortable answering that question, I think that's also a warning sign, right? Like this, if it's going to be, in my opinion, if it's something you want to proceed with, it's something that you have a reasonable prospect of earning a profit and you are primarily driving that product or you're predominantly driving the product profit from sales of product,
okay.
right? And again, like a lot of times you might ask those questions and you might get really murky answers.
Mm,
The other thing is that if the compensation plan is really complicated, that would concern me. A lot of these compensation plans are like really hard to decipher. And so then you're operating in this state of the unknown. Like, I don't even know how I'm going to get paid, right? And I think that's a bit of a problem too, right? Like you should understand the terms, you should understand your risk of loss, your likelihood of profit, and you should understand the role of recruitment. And you should also understand like how much money do I have to fork over for this thing, right? Like what's the initial investment? What is the ongoing investment I might have to make? Like you want to have clarity on those things before you walk into it. And then as your second question was about how to talk to somebody if
yeah,
you see something and you're concerned about it.
yeah,
This can be really hard. I've actually had a lot of students come to me with things. Um, and sometimes they're already really excited about it. They may be already in it, right? And one of the things I try to remember is to take their goals seriously, right? Like they may be doing this because they want to be entrepreneurial, or they may be doing this because they really want to demonstrate that they have certain skills, like that, that they're capable of succeeding at this thing. So one of the things I try to do is just hear what their goals are and then try to get them to take in as much information as possible about whether they're progressing toward those goals. So if your goal is to be an entrepreneur and you really want to own your own business, and this seems like it's often advertised as like a very low cost way to do that, well then, the objective of a business is to turn a profit. So are you tracking your expenses? Are you tracking how much you're earning? Are you really treating this as a business, right? Because the truth is that most people in multi-level marketing engagements lose money. And so, you know, I totally understand that aspiration. So let's see if that's working out for you, right? And just encourage people to assess it like they would any venture.
okay. And then is there an element of like sunk cost factor in getting
Oh,
someone out of it?
Oh, I mean, sunk cost, we kind of describe that as sunk cost fallacy. And I think, just for listeners, like the way that we think about that is like you've already invested money or time or your reputation or all of the above into something. And now it may be irreversible, that investment, but you follow that money with more money, that time with more time, right? Because you don't want to let go of that investment that you made. And we've all had like maybe a used car or like a relationship or like something where we like, oh, we know this maybe isn't going well, but we don't want to give up on it because we've already invested so much time, money, or all these other things, right? Social capital. But from an economic point of view, I would tell you, like, that's why it's called a fallacy. Like, if it's irreversible, it's behind you. You can't change what you've already invested in, right? So you need to try to understand that that is a cognitive bias that affects all of us and try to sort of say, what's past is past. How do I see how this is going now? Right. And try not to let that affect your ongoing decisions. But it affects all of us.
I feel like there's a lot in there that we could continue delving into.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess, yeah, I think let's leave it at that for now. If this feels like there's something that people have even more questions about, like potentially leave the door open to coming back and answering those questions.
Sure.
But one of my questions that I have is, for being an expert witness in court, do you get like a little badge? Do you get like a little something that says expert witness?
That is such a nice, lovely question, but no. But I do have to take the oath, you have to raise the right hand. Um, you sit in like the, you know, witness box. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never done a jury trial though, only bench trials. So so far I've only been talking to a judge. I haven't actually had a jury. I think a jury trial would be a very interesting
That
experience.
feels like it'd be a lot more fun time.
Mhm.
But
Well, it's
okay.
it's actually really interesting because I think it would be a lot like teaching, like you're trying to reach people with common sense language, right? And um teach them things that might be kind of nuanced and so I think I would like that just because it's a little more like, you know, um, college teaching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and even if it just creates a greater awareness for that group then versus just chatting with the judge
Yeah.
about it. Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
nice. As we starting to wrap things up here, I just kind of want to look over, doing all these things, the professor, the consultant, and all that. How are you able to kind of like balance that? You said you're married, you have at least one kid. How are you able to balance doing all these things and growing in your profession while uh, being a caregiver and everything associated with that?
Well, I will be honest that I'm glad that I had 10 years. I have 3 kids, and I was able to focus on that and part-time teaching during the first 10 years. I think once I went tenure track and really launched research and became an expert witness, balance wasn't exactly the word that I would use for my life.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I'm not sure I have a lot of advice there other than I'm really glad that like in the really like I think formative early years of my kids' lives, I wasn't trying to have 10 hats. Um, and I will say, I think my kids have seen how that played out for me and that they've used that to inform how they want their lives to be, which may not look like mine. I mean, I think there were definite costs to, well, I don't have any hobbies. Let's just say
Okay.
that.
This is your hobby. Yeah,
Yeah,
this
it
is
kind
actually your
yeah,
hobby.
that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'm starting to, but I, just in general, I mean, it's been taxing, but really compelling. So, and I think being able to find ways where the things that I'm researching come up in the help me be a better teacher, and the things that I'm teaching and researching help me be a good expert. Like, I think the fact that it all feels connected has made it a really rich experience, but a demanding one.
Okay. And with both your passion and your teaching, which it sounds like teaching is also your passion. Um, with all of that kind of taking up so much time, then what is it that you use to kind of relax and pull back away? from that a bit to kind of like rejuvenate?
I mean, I sing at the top of my lungs in the car.
Okay, all right. What do you say?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I have to admit to Taylor Swift, um, Muna, King Princess. I have a number of different artists I like, but yeah.
I've heard of
Haim.
one of those. I've heard of one of those, but I'll have to take
Female
a look.
bands and yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, gotcha. I'll have to take a little gander at those later. But
I mean, I
um,
would look a little silly, I'm sure, from like somebody who's driving near me, but I have a commute, so I figure it's a good way to
yeah,
spend my time.
you got to do something, right? Like podcast isn't for everyone. But yeah, no, I get that. I get that. And as well, has there been anything that you've been consuming, whether that's a book, podcast? I feel like that you
Yeah.
normally have other options that have kind of caused you to like kind of pause and think and like kind of reevaluate even.
Oh, well, it's not a brand new book, but it's sitting right there actually. One of the ones that I just love and I taught in a recent class called Judgment Decision Making is a book called The Undoing Project. And it's by Michael Lewis, who's famous for The Blind Side and many other things. And he tells this intellectual story of Kahneman and Tversky, who are like the two kind of forefathers of like behavioral economics.
Hmm.
But what's so interesting about it is that it's the story of a relationship. And it's the story of how a relationship sparked all these intellectual ideas. Like you can literally see sparks flying as these two people just talk and bang their heads against each other, and like it just generated all this knowledge. And it's so I just love that book. It's always like the first one that I recommend if you just want like a good story about, yeah, both about behavioral economics but more about how relationship and intellectual ideas come together.
Okay. And what was the name of that book?
The Undoing Project.
The Undoing Project. All right, that's awesome. I'll have to add that to my list as well. I feel like I don't know if anyone else ever has this problem of like they listen to a podcast or a sermon or anything, and then the person's like, "Yeah, I've read these three books or four. I'd love to recommend them." And then you go out and you purchase them, and you're like, "Yeah,"
Oh,
and then they
and then they
don't get
sit.
to finish.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
100%.
I've got three in my backpack right
Yep,
now. Like, I'm 5 pages into each one of them, but
I hear you.
um,
Universal problem.
yeah, yeah. But someday,
Mhm.
someday I'll get to, and I will be a much better person as a result. I'm sure. Anything else you want to add before we head on out?
No, other than I just think like a lot of people, because I work with college students who are trying to figure out what's next for them, and you hear about these things that people are doing and you don't know how they got there. And I think that's one of the cool things about your podcast, right? Is like explains the meandering path that, or maybe straight line path that people take to arrive at some place. But I think one of the things that I constantly say, and it probably sounds very cheesy, is like just keep taking the next interesting turn, right? Because you're going to take a million turns and there's no wrong one if it feels like it's an intriguing next step, right? There's no way I could have planned this outcome. Like, I didn't know I was going to be a professor. I didn't know I was going to be an expert. Like, there's no way I could have predicted, you know, where I am now, and who knows where I'll be, and right. And although I think I'm pretty settled now, but um
You've got tenure.
so right, but
So you
like
should be settled.
you just can't manufacture it. You just have to keep taking the interesting turns, and you will then have an interesting life, right? Like um and try not to worry that it's like the wrong thing, right? Because there's so much serendipity and just things you can't. And then of course also just like just asking, striking up conversations. One of the ways that I first got into this space also was like I commented on an article,
Mm.
and I never do that, never. But like a lawyer saw it, and it was like, anyway, it just mean that there's like just take interesting turns, but also talk to people, right? And like be open to like, you know, and again, like life will be interesting, right?
And finally, one last question. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
What would you say is the legacy that you want to leave?
Well, I mean, I think I would separate that into the legacy I'd like to leave like in my personal life, and professional life. And in my personal life, like I would like one, I would like my kids to find work that really brings them meaning, right? Like no matter what it is. And because I do think we spend a lot of our time at work, right?
Mm,
So like, you know, finding things that like um regardless of status or whatever else, right? Like that bring us true meaning is of course a great goal. And I hope that they see that in my journey, you know. Um Professionally, I hope that people that I interacted with, and I guess it's true of my family too, feel that I cared about the people I was engaging with, right? Like that I, whether it's a student, right, that I tried to see them as an individual who had individual goals, talents, needs, and that I try to do things with like care and intention. And I'm gonna fail, and I'm gonna not always be good at that, and I'm gonna forget things people told me, and like, but um, I guess I hope that there's like a legacy of like, you know, taking care to do work well, but also to be, you know, like in relationship to the people that I'm doing it with,
mm.
right? That it's not just a transaction, um, and that they felt cared for in the process.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Professor Bosley, for
Thank you.
appearing on my show and just chatting about life.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
Yeah. All right. And that is it for our episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe.